Story number 2, waiting for him to poop. I'm Nick Redwine, but to our family, I'm G-Dad. For more than 30 years, Grandma Debbie and I owned Nick's sports cards. Along the way, we met Hall of Famers, celebrities, professional athletes, and thousands of everyday people who became part of our lives. But some of the people we remember best were the kids. They came into the store to buy cards, trade with their friends, talk sports, and every once in a while say something so completely unexpected that you never forgot it. These stories aren't really about sports cards. They're about the people we met, the things that happened, the lessons we learned, and the life Grandma Debbie and I built together. We're telling them so our grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and anyone who comes after us will always have a way to know us. Because every life has stories worth remembering. This is story number 2, waiting for him to poop. Remember that old Art Linkletter show, Kids Say the Darndest Things? Well, after waiting on kids for nearly 30 years at Nick's Sports Cards, I learned something. Art Linkletter was right. You never know what a kid is going to say. Adults spend years learning how to filter what comes out of their mouths. Kids just launch straight into the truth. And unfortunately, most parents and grandparents have learned that lesson the hard way. We had 2 brothers who practically grew up in our store. Danny and David. Danny was about 10 years old. His little brother David was probably 6. They were being raised in Texas, but somehow they had both turned out right. They were big Oklahoma Sooner fans. So naturally, I liked these kids. Now you have to understand something about Texas and Oklahoma football. These aren't just 2 college football teams. They're 2 of the biggest programs in the country, and they've been going after each other for more than 100 years. There is absolutely no love lost between them. Our store was in Dallas, so naturally we had plenty of Texas fans. But everybody knew I was an Oklahoma Sooner fan. Mention OU and Texas in the same room, and otherwise reasonable adults can suddenly start acting like they're negotiating a hostage situation. Over the years, things could get pretty lively. But I had one rule: whenever the Texas and Oklahoma people really started going at each other, I might have been a Sooner fan. But I wasn't stupid. I stayed behind the counter, kept my mouth shut, and let them fight it out. Danny and David were regulars at the store, and we knew them well enough that whenever one brother showed up without the other, we noticed. Danny was the older brother. He was a serious kid, calm, thoughtful. He already carried himself like a middle-aged accountant trying to explain tax law to Congress. David was the opposite. At 6 years old, that kid had the energy of a Labrador puppy after eating birthday cake. The boys loved the shop. They'd tear through packs, argue over players, beg their grandmother for snacks, and somehow manage to touch nearly everything in the store within 15 minutes. And usually wherever one brother was, the other wasn't far behind. So one afternoon when Danny walked into the store with his grandmother, something immediately seemed strange. No David. That caught my attention. So I leaned over the counter and asked, "Hey Danny, where's your little brother David?" The instant the words came out of my mouth, I knew something was wrong. Their grandmother was sitting in what we called our mother's chair, the chair beside the counter where mothers and grandmothers sat while the kids looked at cards. She looked at me with absolute panic on her face. Then she buried her face in her hands. "Please, don't ask." Now, when a grandmother looks you directly in the eye and says, "Please don't ask," that's usually your signal to stop talking immediately. Unfortunately, I've never claimed to be the smartest man in Texas. So naturally, I kept going. Danny didn't hesitate. He didn't look at Grandma. He didn't lower his voice. He just matter-of-factly announced he's at home. Mom's following him around, waiting for him to poop. The entire store seemed to stop. Debbie looked at me. I looked at Debbie. A couple of customers stopped flipping through baseball cards. And Grandma, her head dropped even farther into her hands. I just stared at Danny. That was definitely not the answer I was expecting. Finally, I said, "I'm sorry, what?" Danny looked at me like he couldn't believe all the adults in the room were having this much trouble keeping up. But now I had to know. So I made mistake number 2. I asked, "Why is your mother waiting for him to poop?" Grandma looked like she wanted that chair to swallow her whole. Danny, meanwhile, looked at me with the confidence of someone twice his age. Then in his most serious grown-up voice, he explained, David swallowed his first tooth. Mom wants it for the scrapbook. For about 2 seconds, the entire store was silent. You could almost see the realization moving from one person to the next. Then it hit us. The whole store exploded. The customers who had been listening completely lost it. Debbie nearly fell over behind the counter. I was laughing so hard I could barely breathe. Grandma looked like she wanted the earth to open up and swallow her whole. And Danny, Danny just stood there, perfectly serious. He couldn't understand what in the world everybody thought was so funny. As far as he was concerned, he'd just given us a perfectly reasonable explanation. Meanwhile, somewhere across town, poor little David was apparently living through the strangest day of his young life. I couldn't get the picture out of my head. His mother following him from room to room, waiting, watching. Probably afraid to let that kid anywhere near a bathroom by himself. In my imagination, she had a kitchen strainer in one hand like she was panning for gold during the California gold rush. Except she wasn't looking for gold. She was looking for a 6-year-old's first tooth. Now listen. Parents get emotional about first teeth. I understand that. You put them in little boxes. You save them in scrapbooks. You write down the dates. But I'm pretty sure once your parenting strategy involves kitchen utensils and stool surveillance, you may have crossed a line. And that's the thing about owning a sports card store. You thought you were selling baseball cards. But really, you were collecting stories. For 30 years, people walked through those doors. Hall of Famers, professional athletes, celebrities, business owners, collectors' mothers, fathers, grandparents, and thousands of kids. Looking back, the cards and memorabilia were only part of the story. The people who walked through our doors became the real story behind Nick's sports cards. Especially the kids. Because no superstar athlete, no celebrity, and no expensive baseball card ever made us laugh quite like a kid who had absolutely no idea. He just said the one thing everybody in the room would remember forever. And I learned an important piece of wisdom that afternoon: adults protect family secrets. Kids hold press conferences. G-Dad's wisdom: 30 years of owning a sports card store taught me a lot about business. But kids taught me something else. Kids don't have filters. Grandparents wish they did. And if a grandmother ever looks you in the eye and says, "Please don't ask," take her advice. Because sometimes the smartest thing you can do is leave well enough alone. Of course, after nearly 30 years at Nick's Sports Cards, I didn't always follow that advice. And Danny wasn't the only kid who ever left us speechless. Sometimes they said something funny. Sometimes they did something funny. And sometimes they farted and fell right out of their chair. That's our next story. Story number 3: farted and fell out of his chair. I'm Nick Redwine, G-Dad. Thanks for spending a little time with me. And I'll see you next time for another story from Baseball, Boobs, and the Babe.